Within the hour, they began to hear the thin whine of arrows leaping off of bowstrings. The shrieks of dying men filled the air, evidence of shafts finding their marks. Of a sudden, the door at the far end of the hall slammed open, and the man in the oily leather jerkin rushed in. He shambled heavily past the empty cells until he came before Nima. He squinted in the direction of Bruckner briefly before turning his attention to the elf maid. The man was fumbling with a heavy crossbow. His breath was labored and reeked of cheap wine. He stared at Nima through red-rimmed eyes, swaying slightly on the spot.
All right, you two. The king's got no more need for troublemakers. Come wandering into town during the dead of night. No.
He turned to glower at Bruckner.
For busybody pirate scum. We was gonna make you dance, boy. Find out about the rest of your filthy company, them what got away at port yesterday, but ain't no time for that now, what with the siege and all.
He was very drunk. He turned back to Nima, licking his lips.
I wanted to interview you, personally. Yeah, find out all your tasty little secrets. But orders is orders.
He raised the crossbow to eye level, aiming directly at Nima's chest.
To the king's justice,
he crooned. The man's cry turned to a howl as an arrow bloomed suddenly from his side, a long black shaft protruding from under his right armpit. He screamed, and his own crossbow careened upward, the bolt discharging wildly into the ceiling. He turned in the direction of the attack, and another arrow sank into his chest. He gurgled and gasped, blood spilling out from between clenched teeth, then he dropped, twitching onto the floor. The sounds of battle outside grew ever more intense, the clang of metal filled the air, and the smell of blood. Inside the prison, a tall figure with upswept black hair and a trimmed beard stepped into view from the end of the hallway, a long black bow in one hand. Bruckner leapt up and against the cell wall to deny the archer a shot against him, gesturing at Nima to do the same. She paid him no heed, instead dropping to her knees before the cell bars, snaking a narrow arm through, straining her fingers towards the key ring hanging from the Gowler's belt. The bearded archer strode down the hallway swiftly, putting a foot on the chest of the man he had just killed. He worked quickly, emptying the man's pockets and surgically cutting a purse from a string around his neck. The man dropped his bow and grabbed Nima's wrist with his free hand as she lifted the keyring gently from its seat. He turned to the half-elf and smiled dryly, staring into her eyes. Planning on going somewhere? Holding her wrist tightly with his right hand, his left finished its work, plucking the dead man's meager belongings forth and stowing them safely away. He turned Nima's wrist slightly, bending her hand down with gentle but steady pressure until the keys dropped into his waiting palm. The stranger stood up, tossing the keyring repeatedly into the air. He was smiling widely, as if he were uniquely party to some great joke that these others too would soon be in on. He looked to Bruckner, then back to Nima. Let's see. I estimate we have roughly, 8 minutes until this building is stormed. My understanding is that the best Bastoran army is to take the city as bloodlessly as possible, so odds are they won't kill the two of you, but... He shrugged. You know how men are when their blood is up. His eyes traced a swift path from Nima's boots up and over her fair form to meet her eyes, his look punctuating the warning. He tossed the keys into the air again. Do you know, I'd be willing to give you these keys, though I'm not sure it wouldn't be a breach of... He grinned wickedly. My civic duty. Normally, prisoners are prisoners for a reason. Then again, old man Janison hasn't exactly been himself of late, has he?
We have been imprisoned here for seeking our fates. No more than any man might do.
The man laughed. A criminal poet, are you? You speak like a Cormorantian. You're a long way from home, boy. He looked back to Nima. And you? Nima met the man's eyes coolly.
A favor I tried to perform for someone went wrong, at least in the eyes of the king's men. Of course, if you were to release me, it would be you who would have the rights to a favor.
She paused for a moment after saying this, and then added,
Us, if you were to release us.
The scoundrel chuckled. It is sad, isn't it, how our best intentions turn against us? Ah, well. He paused a moment, then turned abruptly. Do me a kindness, wait here a moment. He dashed down the hall, ignoring any cries to the contrary. A key scraping a lock sounded faintly. 40 seconds or so passed. Then the man dashed back into sight. "Here," he announced, holding the keys out to Nima, but keeping them in his hand. "By the time you are out, I shall be gone. I've opened the holding room at the end of the hall. Your equipment should all be there. Your gold?" He shrugged. "Well, we'll call that my fee. Good luck, thief," he said to Nima. Then he turned and delivered a mocking salute to Bruckner, crowing, "And fare thee well, my young criminal poet." Then he dropped the keys on the floor before Nima's cell and was off. Nima cursed under her breath at the thief's mention of the gold, then set to unlocking her cell door, with, it must be noted, slightly shaking hands. She strode over to Bruckner's cell, asking him,
"Which deity did you say exactly you had looking out for you?"
Ilium the sword, and Talus, who stays the good man's courage. To what gods do you pray?
Nima did not answer. She turned the key and slid Bruckner's cell door open, then made haste to follow after the archer. By the time the swordsman had made it to the hallway, Nima was halfway up the short flight of stairs leading to the storeroom. Inside, she found a window smashed outward and a length of rope secured to a wall sconce trailing over the sill. Outside and below, she caught a glimpse of the man who had saved them, skirting around a contingent of archers taking aim at some unseen foe. Cursing him again, Nima set to swiftly searching the room. She found her own equipment easily enough, sitting in the back of a long wooden lockbox. The lid was up, the lock picked. Her purse was gone, as promised, but the rest of her belongings appeared to be there. In a trap desk drawer, she found a curative filter of crimson shade in a dusty crystal bottle and an old book written in what appeared to be one of the infernal tongues. Bruckner had entered shortly after Nima and made his way swiftly, for the sounds of violence were growing louder, and some now originated clearly from within the building, to his own belongings that had been stored hastily in a corner cabinet. The used things consisted in a barely broken-in set of studded leather armor, a heavy steel shield, and, he breathed a sigh of relief to see it tucked in the corner of the wooden locker, his longsword. The sword was made especially for Bruckner by his father, a smith of renown in Bruckner's home in the Kingswood. He had worked on it during the evenings for over a year, crafting it to perfection. 2 fullers ran down the length of the adamantine blade. The boy had worked himself for several years, saving gold to help his father pay for the precious metal, but the results had been well worth it. The black blade gleamed as Bruckner drew it briefly from the scabbard. The tang was wrapped in a handle of dark stained cherry wood, overwound with a thin webbing of cured black leather. The pommel was a solid knob of adamantine, rounded and glossy. The blade had not yet seen battle. Bruckner found also his cloak and satchel, which contained 2 curative draughts, a half-eaten loaf of stale bread and some salted meat. His coin purse was, unsurprisingly, missing as well. Bruckner quickly donned his armor and buckled on sword and shield. As Bruckner lashed his shield tight against his arm and Nima whirled her green cloak on over freshly donned leather armor, the 2 escapees heard the heavy stamp of armored feet pounding their way up the stairs into the cell-lined corridor. A man with clanking tread could be heard at the other end of the hallway. Nima and Bruckner saw him burst into view, a heavy-set man with a lance wearing half-plate. He caught sight of the 2 prisoners and let out a terrible bellow. Bruckner drew his sword and Nima cocked her crossbow, setting a quarrel to the string. The armored man in the hallway was now ascending the stairs. He slowed as he saw the weapons being prepared against him, but came on still. 2 more men were right behind him now. The second held a worn great hammer, and the third wielded a falchion. The first gained the summit of the steps. He leveled his lance and began walking forward slowly. His face transformed into a snarl, and he leapt forward, keening out with the tip of his lance. As Nima prepared herself to fire, a deep voice from behind the 3 men called out,
"Hold!"
The man immediately ceased his headlong charge and pulled back with an angry curse to stand with his fellows. The 3 men kept their eyes on Nima and Bruckner, however, and their weapons at the ready. They waited as someone ponderously heavy climbed the stairs behind them. A bear of a man shoved his way through, coming to stand in front of the 2 escaped prisoners, his one good eye glowering. A mighty greatsword hung sheathed across his back, the handle jutting up over his left shoulder. His hair was a wild mane of tangled brown, his beard spilled over his chest. One of his eyes was missing, and a jagged scar ran the length of his face, over the empty socket and down into the forest of beard growth.
"You 2 aren't of Emmenia,"
he roughly said.
No, we're travelers.
He looked at Bruckner sharply.
Sheathe your sword, boy. I'm glad I followed this lot up here.
He turned and cuffed the first of the 3 men to enter the room, brutally. The man's head snapped back, crashing into the head of the soldier behind him. The one-eyed man roared at them to get out.
Bloody idiot mercenaries,
he said as they left, all a mixture of shock and sullen rage, and still well within earshot. The giant sat down, unsheathing his own sword and stabbing the tip into the ground between his feet as he settled his considerable frame onto a chair. He began swiveling the sword by its grip between the palms of his hands slowly, the tip gouging thick shavings out of the wooden floor. He considered Nima and Bruckner.
Do you not just enjoy frequenting foreign prisons, or were you more permanent guests here?
Bruckner sheathed his sword.
We were taken here several days ago for no clear reason.
Nima still held her crossbow in ready-to-shoot position. She spoke from the depths of her hood.
Well, not exactly no clear reason.
She looked curiously at Bruckner for a moment.
For me, at least. But as you note, we are not of Emmenia. We don't belong here, and we've no intention of staying here. So if you will kindly allow us to depart...